Thank you, Marcus, for all these kind words. It's almost embarrassing to come up here now, but let me try to use in a positive sense all what you've laid the foundation for. And start by actually thanking all of you for the work that you did to create the views from the front line. I don't think that it was by any means a simple process, not just because there were 400 of you, but there were 400 very different, diverse, sometimes peculiar organizations trying to meld into formulating a process and a product that we now have on the table. So that's my personal recognition and gratitude to all of you. And I will then go on to say a little bit later what it means for you and for us. But just to say that you have clearly, through this work and this product, moved the agenda forwards very considerably. And that's an achievement, and it also generates a bit of responsibility, of course. But let me start just quick big picture issue, and I will summarize with what I think are some of our shared challenges, but also the ones that belong maybe particularly to the UN and some to you, and maybe where we can then together achieve things and what are the key processes. I have promised not to speak for more than 15 minutes, which is a challenge. You can always interrupt me, because I suspect, just being briefed of your discussions in the last few days, that you would rather prefer to have a discussion with me than just listen to me. So, the purpose of all this is ISDR is a large global partnership to create disaster risk reduction, awareness and action. That's as simple as it is. None of these things really happen without masses of people, organizations with commitment and clear and concrete insights and ability to influence processes move in the same pace and space to that objective. But we wouldn't have today what we have achieved, the environmental movement, the human rights movement. We wouldn't have these achievements if people did not have the persistence. So we also have persistence. That's a starting point, not to get discouraged. Because we live, of course, today and operate in an environment that is such a clamor for attention. Everyone has issues and they're all significant. And you know, it comes back to people who work with issues like risk reduction to try to make sense of the connectivity and where the connecting points are and where the pressure points are. But one thing is, there is no doubt, sometimes for very tragic reasons, like this week, because of Haiti, but every time there is a major emergency, there is also a shift forwards on disaster risk reduction. It's not really the way it should be, but those are the opportunities we have to use. And there is, I honestly cannot really explain to you how this happened, but there are even some of the very large governments in the world who said, well, maybe we are not very wise in paying so much for continuous relief. Maybe we should cut that a bit by making better investment in prevention. That's if you are quite rich, you make these considerations. If you're not such a rich country, your reasoning and the balance between the immediacy and the long term may be a bit different, but not totally different. The same wisdom is there, but the way you take decisions are probably different if you are a national government, and by all means an NGO as well. We have to mobilize public opinion. Governments change better when they have a well-informed public that moves, but they also change if public moves on them. But the real positive version of this statement is if governments feel supported by their public to make tough decisions, and the public is informed and feel that they are entrusted by being part of understanding this, they move even better. And my final point is on development investment. You know, I think too much of our work in risk reduction is still linked to disaster relief community. And you are well aware of Yoga Framework goal priority number 4 on addressing the root causes, as we say. But how do we move, how can we really help move the agenda into the longer term development agenda this year? I have made it my personal commitment to work on this in the UN and with governments, but maybe you can tell me how you think we should do this together. What also with Andrew and Alan, I think will tell you there's a lot, and you know, you're the ones who produced this. You know that so many things are going on. You know, at local level, at intermediate level, it's still a bit scattered and ad hoc, and therefore you don't quite get the momentum, but it's also not visible enough. So how do we increase the visibility of all the things that demonstrate that things can change? I very often get this question myself. I was in a meeting in Cairo not long ago where some of my, in fact you and colleagues, after a meeting they laughed a little bit at me and said, you must have the most difficult job in the world to convince people to change their behavior on something that's so obvious. So I said to them, well, maybe my main job is to combat cynicism and actually to convince, to really constantly beat the drum of things are changing, things can change, yes, there is a possibility for change. But cynicism and loss of spirit is, of course, not in your community at all what happens, but I can assure you it tends to happen in other communities. So don't underestimate that spirit among yourself of leading. That sense of that things really have to change and they can change. We at ISDR, and I'm sure you also can sense this, so the understanding that the costs for disasters are increasing. This is the frequency, the numbers, and the invisibility of disasters. Small flooding, smaller earthquakes, not smaller necessarily for the community, but they don't make the headlines of international media. And for us, an increasing, incredible number of requests from governments to help them technically, process-wise, advice, ideas, whatever. It's a kind of proximity in the working process, not to do their job, but to work alongside them. And as you're familiar with the uneven progress in all the HFA areas, but because I remember also one of the recommendations in your report which says it specifically focuses on the humanitarian area should become more clever in actually looking at all the phases of humanitarian relief, which is a work that has been going on, but I think the big obstacle there is indeed the very weak linkages to development agenda. And if you can't link your humanitarian relief work structurally, institutionally, mindset with the development agenda, you always get a big gap which is destructive in terms of momentum and in terms of building on the investments you do in the humanitarian relief. And I think that's sort of one of the key elements that we also need to drive, although the positive message of Goal 5 is huge progress has been made, and that's very clear, at least in my time span in the international community working with governments.